Admiral Voskareth of the 7th Galactic Concordance Fleet had, in his 43 years of military service, given exactly 2,117 direct orders. He knew the number because he kept a personal log. Not out of vanity, though he had plenty of that, out of precision. An admiral who could not track his own commands had no business commanding anything more complicated than a lunch order. Of those 2,117 orders, exactly 0 had ever been ignored until today. He would spend a significant amount of time afterward debating whether ignored was the right word. Technically, Sergeant Elena Vasquez had acknowledged the order. She had looked directly at his holographic projection, nodded once in a way that suggested she had heard him, and then proceeded to do the complete opposite of what he had told her to do. Some of his officers later argued this was worse than ignoring an order. Ignoring implied inattention, carelessness, possibly a communications failure. What Vasquez had done implied something far more unsettling. She had heard him. She had understood him, and she had made a different decision. The Kurith corridor was not, despite its name, particularly corridor-like. It was a region of space, roughly 40 light-years long, compressed on either side, by twin nebulae whose electromagnetic interference played absolute havoc with long-range sensors and faster-than-light navigation. Named after a survey mission whose entire crew had died when their ship dropped out of FTL into an asteroid field they're malfunctioning. Sensors had completely failed to detect. This was considered an inauspicious start. Things had not improved much since. Strategically speaking, the corridor was a nightmare. It was also completely unavoidable if you needed to move a fleet from the concordances. Core systems to the outer reaches without a 6-week detour. 6 weeks in military logistics was an eternity. So fleets used the corridor. They did it carefully, with their sensors running hot and their pilots white-knuckling the controls. But they did it. The Veth Dominion knew this. Fleet Commander Treskenveth had spent for years planning the operation his people called the Kurith Convergence. 3 full battle groups hidden inside the corridor behind asteroid formations, a 4th group at the exit, a 5th cutting off retreat at the entrance, 47 warships. Against whatever the Concordance sent through. He had run the simulations hundreds of times. He had not, in any of those simulations, accounted for Elena Vasquez. To be fair, almost no one had accounted for Elena Vasquez. Her file listed her as a moderately distinguished non-commissioned officer of the 7th Infantry Division, attached to the 7th Fleet as part of its ground forces complement. A handful of campaign decorations, a commendation for valor, and 1 disciplinary note from 3 years prior regarding what was described, with magnificent understatement, as unauthorized tactical improvisation during the defense of Station Vila. The disciplinary note was the most informative part of her file, but only if you knew how to read it. Admiral Voskareth had not known how to read it. He had promoted her because she had the best close-quarters combat scores of any human in the division, and he needed good soldiers, not complicated ones. He thought about her a great deal after the Kurith corridor. The 7th Fleet entered the corridor on a Tuesday. 17 ships, including for cruisers and the flagship Eternal Concordance. 40 minutes into the transit, the sensor screamed. Contact, Tactical Officer Brennan reported, his voice admirably steady. Multiple contacts. Bearing 027, range 40,000 kilometers. 3 battle groups, sir. 31 ships. Veth configuration. Voskareth felt the cold that had nothing to do with the ship's temperature systems. Sir, additional contacts at the corridor exit. And Brennan's voice tightened further. Contacts behind us? At the entrance. 17 ships. 40-plus enemies. Degraded sensors. No FTL option inside the corridor. They had chosen this location with exquisite care. All ships, battle stations. The Admiral's voice was the voice of a man who had spent 40 years learning to sound like he had considered every possibility. Formation Delta, fall back toward the corridor center. Signal the reserve fleet. Priority 1 emergency. The first Veth volley fired a moment later. 2 decks below the bridge. Fleet Sergeant Elena Vasquez was listening to everything. As senior NCO of the fleet's ground forces, she was looped into tactical communications during combat scenarios. She was standing over a holographic tactical display, her dark eyes moving across it with an expression her subordinates would have recognized immediately and her superiors would have found deeply alarming. It was the expression she wore when she had already figured out what needed to happen. Petty Officer Diaz, her plenary second, watched the display with open distress. Sergeant, his translator rendered his whistling language into standard. The fleet is surrounded. This seems very bad. Vasquez nodded slowly. Then she pulled up a secondary overlay, combining the sensor readings with topographic data on the corridor itself, the asteroids, the nebula interference densities, the specific positions of the Veth fleet groups. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she reached for the COM channel. Getting through to Admiral Voskareth in the middle of an active engagement was not a simple process. She tried the standard request channel, queued. She tried the emergency override, restricted to command-level officers. She tried Tactical Officer Brennan's personal line and explained, with considerable conciseness, why she needed 30 seconds of the Admiral's time. Brennan patched her through in under a minute. Sergeant Vasquez, the Admiral's voice was clipped and efficient. This is not the time. Sir, I'm looking at the corridor topology and the Veth positions. I think there's a play. A pause, short but distinct. 30 seconds. Go. Vasquez talked fast. Sir, the Veth battle group at bearing 027 is positioned behind asteroid cluster Gamma 7. The cluster's mass is creating a localized sensor shadow, roughly 20-degree cone, directly behind it. Their formation has a gap, small but real. The 2 ships on the right flank are maintaining minimum safe distance from the asteroid field. If you push the point ship of Formation Delta directly at that gap, hard burn. They can't close it in time without collision risk. You punch through. You're out of the kill box with 11 ships, maybe 12, before the exit group can reposition. Another pause. Longer. That's a suicide run for the point ship, the Admiral said. Yes, sir, but the rest make it through. I have 17 ships. Sergeant, I am not sacrificing one to save 11. Vasquez was quiet for exactly 1 second. Sir, with respect, the alternative is losing all 17. The channel went quiet. On the tactical display, the Veth were advancing. Thank you, Sergeant. Stand by. The channel clicked to hold. For minutes of rapid command conference followed. Voskareth's tactical staff confirmed the asteroid shadow in 90 seconds. The gap was real. The timing would work. The debate was not whether the plan was sound. The debate was who was going to be the point ship. Captain Relishgar of the cruiser Resolute Determination requested the position. Most experienced cruiser captain in the fleet, heaviest forward armor. His argument was logical. His voice was steady. Everyone on the bridge knew he was volunteering to die. Formation Delta, Voskareth said. Relishgar, you have point. Full burn. Bearing, sir. The Admiral recognized the voice instantly, Sergeant Vasquez. This is not the time for sir. I'm not calling about the formation. I'm calling because I'm already in Shuttle Bay 3. The bridge went very quiet. Vasquez continued without pause. I've pulled the tactical shuttle. It's smaller and faster than any ship in your fleet. I can fit through a gap that the Resolute Determination cannot. If the Veth sensor arrays are optimized for ship-class targets, which their configuration suggests, A shuttle at full burn may not register as a threat worth prioritizing until it's already through. You are a ground forces sergeant, the Admiral said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a man with many things to say and no time to say them. You are not a pilot. You are not authorized to conduct solo combat operations. You are not authorized to take that shuttle. Stand down, Sergeant. That is a direct order. Understood. Sir, a pause. Sir. Brennan's voice, uncertain. Shuttle Bay 3 is reporting a launch cycle initiation. The Admiral's mandibles click together like snapping branches. Vasquez. Sir, I heard your order. Her voice was entirely level. I want you to know that I heard it and I understood it. What I'm about to do is wrong by every regulation I signed, and I accept all consequences. But I've run the numbers. A shuttle through, that gap gives you 14 ships instead of 11. 3 more ships, roughly 600 more people. I can fit where the Resolute Determination cannot, and I can get through before the window closes. Nothing in their fleet is going to believe a tactical shuttle is doing what I'm doing until it's already done it. When you get through, Voskareth said, and something had shifted in his voice. Something that was not quite anger anymore. You will present yourself for full disciplinary review. Yes, sir. Full consequences. I will not intervene. Understood. Sir. A beat. Your burn vector is 11 degrees off optimal. Correct to bearing 247.3. A pause. Then, quietly. Yes, sir. Thank you. Sir, the shuttle launched. What happened in the next 4 minutes and 17 seconds was discussed, analyzed, and debated in concordance military circles for years. Shuttle! Echo 7 accelerated on bearing 247.3 at 112% of its rated thrust capacity. The rated capacity assumed a pilot who intended to keep the shuttle intact afterward. Vasquez appeared to have made different assumptions. The Veth battle group registered it on their sensors. Their tactical AI flagged it as a small craft, threat level minimal, queued for engagement at standard priority. Not urgent. Not immediate. This was a category error of considerable consequence. The shuttle's course took it directly through the gap in the Veth right flank. The narrow corridor between the asteroid field and the outermost destroyer's minimum safe position. At the moment of transit, the gap was approximately 900 meters wide. The shuttle was 11 meters wide. It passed through with 889 meters to spare on one side and the full electromagnetic chaos of a nebula-adjacent asteroid field on the other. If Vasquez found any of this interesting, she did not say so on the recording, because she was mostly saying the kinds of things that human pilots say when traveling at 100 and 12% rated thrust through a 900-meter gap at combat speed. The Veth destroyer attempted to reposition. It could not. The asteroid field was on one side and the next ship in formation was on the other. The gap remained. Then Formation Delta moved. With the Veth right flank frozen for the critical seconds of the repositioning delay. The Resolute Determination punched through on Vasquez's vector, then the second ship, then the third. The Resolute took 3 direct hits that would require 2 months in a repair dock. Captain Relishgar would later describe the experience as the most terrifying and most beautiful thing he had ever witnessed. 14 ships made it through. The Veth exit group scrambled to intercept, but they had been positioned for a fleet in standard transit formation, not 14 ships emerging from an unexpected vector at full combat speed. The engagement was brief and extremely violent. When it was over, Veth ships were disabled, 2 were destroyed, and the remaining exit vessels were pulling back. The Concordance fleet emerged from the Korath corridor into open space. 47 Veth ships did not pursue. Inside the corridor, Fleet Commander Treskenveth watched his tactical display and tried to understand what had just happened. His Korath convergence had been planned for 4 years. 47 ships against 17. A perfect kill box. No viable escape vector. He had run the simulations hundreds of times. Not one of his simulations had included a human flying a tactical shuttle through a 900-meter gap at 112% rated thrust because a superior officer had told her to stand down, and she had decided the math was more important than the order. He went back through his simulation data and tried to find the point at which he could have predicted this. Could not. The behavior was, by any reasonable strategic model, irrational. No military doctrine in his experience included provisions for officers ignoring direct orders from admirals to fly unarmed shuttles through combat formations. You could not plan for something that should not happen. He filed a very detailed report for Dominion Strategic Command. The report noted, with the precise despair of a strategist confronting something that broke his models, that the Concordance fleet's human personnel appeared to operate under a decision-making framework that could not be reliably modeled using standard predictive algorithms. He recommended that the Dominion reconsider any future plans that relied on predicting how humans would respond to overwhelming tactical disadvantage. He did not specify what humans should be expected to do instead, because he genuinely had no idea, and he was not willing to guess anymore. Echo 7 came down on the far side of the corridor running on 6% fuel reserves and one functioning attitude thruster, having shed its port-side sensor array somewhere in the vicinity of the asteroid cluster along, with what the maintenance report would describe as a non-trivial quantity of hull coating. Vasquez emerged from the cockpit with a bruise forming along her left cheekbone, her hair escaping its regulation tie, and the particular expression of someone who has been running on pure adrenaline for 4 minutes and is, only now, beginning to feel the edges of what they have done. She was immediately flanked by 2 security officers, Fleet Sergeant Elena Vasquez. The senior officer used the word requested with the careful precision of someone following instructions to the letter. You are requested to present yourself to the flag bridge. She had known this was coming since the moment she initiated the launch cycle. She had made her accounting of it somewhere around the 30-second mark of the transit, when the Veth destroyer had been close enough that she could see its hull markings on her screen. She had decided in that moment that the math still worked. That 600 people were worth a disciplinary proceeding. That she could stand in front of an admiral and explain her reasoning without flinching. Because the reasoning was sound, and sound reasoning was worth whatever it cost. She had been raised by a structural engineer and a wildfire crew chief. Both of them had taught her the same thing in different words. Sometimes the structure that saves lives is the one that takes the damage. Sometimes you put the crew chief at the front of the break, not because it is safe, but because it is the only position that works. I'm ready, she said. The flag bridge was very quiet when she arrived. Admiral Voskareth stood at the center of it. He was not looking at the tactical displays. He was looking at her Sergeant Vasquez. His voice was precisely controlled. You disobeyed a direct order. Yes, sir. Under combat conditions. Yes, sir. In a vessel you were not certified to pilot on a solo combat operation. I am rated for tactical shuttle operations, sir. The solo and combat designations are areas where I acknowledge the debrief will have significant commentary. A pause with texture in it. 14 ships. Vasquez. You gave me 14 ships instead of 11? Yes, sir. Captain Relishgar filed a commendation request for you approximately 7 minutes after the engagement ended. He used language I will not repeat on this bridge. The sentiment was clear. He was quiet for a moment. The formal disciplinary process will proceed. I told you I would not intervene in the consequences. I meant that. He paused. In the interim, you are temporarily attached to the flag bridge tactical staff. Consultant capacity You will report to Tactical Officer Brennan. You will not fly any more shuttles without explicit authorization. You will not make any further unilateral decisions about acceptable trade-offs without consulting the command staff first. Am I understood? Yes, sir. If you believe a command staff decision is in error, you express that opinion through the appropriate channels, loudly, if necessary, but through the channels. Yes, sir. Good. He turned back to the tactical display. Then, without looking at her, the wildfire analogy. In your personnel file, the reviewing officer from Proxima noted that you explained your decisions using a wildfire suppression framework. That sometimes the correct response to an overwhelming threat is not to retreat from it, but to find the gap and send something small enough through it fast enough. He paused. I looked at the gap too, he said. After you pointed it out, I ran the numbers. Then I gave you the corrected burn vector. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Dismissed, Sergeant. Report to Brennan in the morning. She turned to leave. His voice caught her at the door. Good math, Vasquez. She paused, nodded once. Thank you, sir. The disciplinary proceedings for Fleet Sergeant Elena Vasquez were resolved 6 months later. The board found her guilty of insubordination. The finding was entered into the record. The board also found that the outcome of that insubordination was the preservation of 3 additional Concordance vessels and approximately 600 personnel. Both findings were true simultaneously, which, the board noted with careful language, reflected the genuine complexity of what had occurred at the Kurith corridor. Vasquez received a formal reprimand. She also received the Concordant Star of Merit for Tactical Innovation under Combat Conditions, the first such decoration ever awarded simultaneously with a disciplinary reprimand. The board acknowledged this was unprecedented. The board further noted that the situation which produced it was unprecedented, and that unprecedented situations sometimes require unprecedented responses. Before the proceedings closed, the board chair looked at Vasquez directly and asked the only question that actually mattered. If you were in the same position again, same information, same odds, same direct order, would you make the same choice? She was quiet for a moment. Not because she did not know the answer, because she was deciding whether to say it. Yes, sir. She said it steadily. Yes, sir, because the math works the same way regardless of how many times you run it. 600 people is 600 people. The order was lawful, and my Admiral had reasons for it, and I respect those reasons. But when I'm looking at a gap that works, and a window that's closing and a shuttle that fits, I am going to put the shuttle through the gap. I will accept whatever the consequences are. I have always been willing to accept the consequences. But I will not tell this board that I would make a different choice, because I would not, and I don't think you would want me to. The board chair looked at her for a long moment. Then he thanked her for her testimony. The deliberations lasted 3 hours. In the Veth Dominion's strategic archives, the file on the Kurith Corridor engagement included a personal addendum from Fleet Commander Treskin Veth, appended 5 years after the battle. It read as follows. I have spent considerable time attempting to understand what made the engagement's outcome possible. The tactical logic is not the mystery. The gap existed. The shuttle fit. The math worked. Any competent analyst could have followed the reasoning. The mystery is that she saw it under those conditions, in that time, and acted on it without hesitation. Not because she did not understand the risk. She clearly understood the risk very well. She accepted the risk and acted anyway, on a calculation that most species would not have made. Not because of faulty reasoning, but because the conclusion of that reasoning would have felt wrong, too small for the problem, too improvised, too dependent on elements outside one's control, She did it anyway. I do not have a strategic model for that. I have reviewed every framework I possess, and I cannot find one that reliably produces this behavior. You cannot, it seems, train it into a force. It appears to be something that humans simply carry with them. We built a perfect trap. We closed every exit. We made the odds so unfavorable that action itself seemed irrational. And she found the gap anyway. In retrospect, I believe we made a fundamental error. We thought we were building a trap for a fleet. We were actually presenting a terrain problem to a species that learned to read terrain before it learned to build ships. We should have known better. What happened at Kurith was not a failure of our plan. We executed it correctly. We had the numbers, the terrain, the initiative, and the element of surprise. What happened was that a human looked at our perfect trap and found a gap. And then she went through it very fast. And she did not ask permission first.